On the 10th anniversary of 9/11, residents of the quiet suburb of Boston, Waltham, would wake up to the horrifying triple murder that occurred on 12 Harding Avenue, the mystery of which still persists to this day. Raphael Tekin, known as Rafi the Most, grew up in Brookline, Massachusetts. He would later attend the predominantly Jewish Brandeis University, where he received a bachelor's degree in history. Rafi would then follow his passion and work as a personal trainer. However, his neighbors believed he was dealing drugs on the side, primarily marijuana, due to the frequent comings and goings of people to the house. Excluding that, his loved ones knew him to be a kind soul who spent most of his adult life at the gym. Eric Hacker Wiseman grew up in a religious family and would remain an outspoken advocate for his Jewish faith his whole life. Later in life, he decided to become a bodybuilder. Similarly to Rafi, however, he was supplementing his income by dealing drugs. He had a couple of run-ins with the law, namely in 2008 when he was stopped by police and discovered to be in possession of a brown paper bag full of weed. He was charged with possession and intent to distribute. And also in 2011, when his landlord stumbled upon his stash and reported him to police. Eric would be charged again, but the charges were later dropped. Likewise, he was cherished by his loved ones due to his gentle soul, kind heart, and quick mind. Brendan Mess, unlike the other two, wasn't very religious. He had graduated with a bachelor's degree in professional writing, but changed course completely and decided to become an MMA fighter with dreams of making it to the UFC. He would work as an MMA instructor, in particular Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But similarly to his friends Rafi and Eric, he would deal drugs on the side, primarily weed. The three friends were rumored to be roommates as they were frequently seen at the second-story apartment on 12 Harding Avenue. The apartment belonged to Brendan. However, Eric was invited to stay in a spare room. In the first week of September, Eric was forced to leave the apartment after Brendan and his girlfriend, Heba, got into a heated argument, which ended up in them breaking up and her slashing his tires and leaving for Florida to cool off. Allegedly, the issue stemmed from Heba wanting Brendan to stop dealing drugs and Eric pulling him in the other direction and wanting him to expand. There were also incidents where Heba would get into arguments with Eric and Rafi over religion due to them being Jewish and her being Muslim. It got to the point where Eric and Rafi would avoid the house altogether if she was there. Little did she know, this would be the last time she saw Brendan alive. On September 11, 2011, Brandon had invited Rafi and Eric to his place to watch a football game, the Dallas Cowboys versus the New York Jets. Eric arrived at around 7:30 p.m., about an hour before the start of the game. It seems like all three men were in communication with friends and family in the next 30 minutes, talking and texting. However, that communication would abruptly halt at around 8 p.m. Surprisingly, that silence would be broken about an hour after it started, but not by text or call, but by a food delivery order to Jerry's Italian Kitchen, a nearby restaurant. That order coming from Eric's phone. He had allegedly ordered meatballs, a chicken cutlet, and sausage. Around 20 minutes after the order was placed, a delivery driver was knocking on the 12th Harding Avenue door, but no one answered. The restaurant tried getting in touch with Eric again, but that attempt was also unsuccessful. The next day, Brendan's girlfriend, Heba, unexpectedly came back from Florida, and after not being able to get in contact with him on his cell, she decided it was time to go to the apartment to try and mend fences. But after knocking on the door and nobody answering, she would ask the landlord to open the apartment. Upon entering the apartment, she would see all three dead. They were all in different rooms and their throats had been so severely slit that they were nearly decapitated. One news report stated that Heba had quickly left the house screaming, quote, "They're all dead," while another stated she left the apartment crying with blood on her feet and then calmly asked for a cigarette.
There was a girl running out of the house saying there's blood everywhere, and like you said, there was like marijuana all over the bodies apparently.
One Waltham police investigator called it, quote, "the worst bloodbath I have ever seen," and compared the wounds to an Al-Qaeda training video. Besides the obvious brutality that sticks out, it seemed the killer had sprinkled marijuana over two of the corpses. Rafi's body showed no signs of a struggle, while Eric had a bloody lip. Being an MMA fighter, Brendan had shown the most fight. He had scratches all over his arms, bruises on his face, and other clear defensive wounds. Besides that, there was no sign of forced entry, which signaled to police the men might have known their killer or killers. Tons of marijuana and $5,000 in cash were left at the house, further emphasizing this wasn't a robbery. A couple of hours later, Middlesex County DA Jerry Leone said that this didn't appear to be a random act. Police quickly theorized that the murders were somehow connected to the drug trade due to the symbolism of the marijuana sprinkling. This was also in part because even though Waltham was described as a quiet suburban town, it did have a history of drug dealing. So police initially thought that the men might have been stepping on somebody's toes in the area. A religious motive was also considered due to the three being Jewish and the 11th of September 2011 being the 10th anniversary of the tragedy. Police quickly set their sights on finding concrete suspects and focused on the person that found the bodies, Heba. They learned that the couple got into frequent arguments that would get very heated, resulting in Heba throwing objects at Brendan, but also that she didn't get along with Eric and Rafi. Theories that she planned the murders in the heat of the moment started circulating, and that Rafi and Eric were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. However, she was quickly eliminated as a suspect because she wasn't in Waltham on the day of the murders, and there was nothing really tying her to the crime scene. The second suspect they focused on was a next-door neighbor of Brendan's, a 19-year-old kid that was known to be aggressive and make threats. He was once arrested for threatening strangers to, quote, "give me your weed now." But he was also quickly dismissed as a suspect, as police concluded that he was better at talking than actually doing. Police continued interviewing friends and family. However, the case went cold. People would later call the police out for their nonchalant behavior and not following up leads given to them by the people close to the victims, and not even establishing a tip line, which is standard procedure. They were accused of waiting for a suspect to shake loose, and not being proactive enough because the victims were connected to the drug trade. The case would go cold for 582 days, until on the 15th of April 2013, the annual Boston Marathon was taking place. However, nothing about this day would be ordinary. Two pressure cooker bombs would explode near the finish line, killing 3 and injuring over 250. After an extensive CCTV footage check, police would identify the culprits to be two brothers, Jokar and Tamerlan Tsarnaev. Then, a manhunt quickly ensued that resulted in a shootout with the police that left both brothers shot, with Tamerlan later succumbing to his injuries, while the younger brother, Jokar, was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. The connection to the Waltham triple murder case is actually Tamerlan Tsarnaev, who before getting radicalized was on a path of pursuing a boxing career. That path would be cut short due to some hardships he faced in his life, which led him to become more religious and later completely radicalized. Friends in his life would talk about how he quit drinking and smoking altogether, and how he would be increasingly interested in politically charged topics such as Israel-Palestine. The gym in which Tamerlan trained was called the Y Crew MMA Gym. Interestingly enough, it was the same gym Brendan Mess trained at, and where Rafi and Eric had worked briefly. Brandon and Tamerlan ended up being sparring partners and became very close, with many describing them as best friends. Later on, they seem to have had a falling out, stemming from Tamerlan getting more and more radicalized and disapproving of Brendan's way of life. A day after the murders, Tamerlan showed up at the gym, and when asked if he had heard about what happened by people there, he apparently laughed it off. He would later skip Brendan's funeral service, with one friend saying, quote, "he was somebody who was in contact with Brendan on a daily basis. Anybody like that, you would think they would have been around." Police would trace phone records that would correspond to Tamerlan being in the area when the murders occurred. Upon further questioning, it would be revealed the two brothers were hanging out with a third man, one who Tamerlan named as his, quote, other brother. That man was Ibrahim Todashev. Ibrahim, like Tamerlan, was a Chechen American and an aspiring MMA fighter. He was also known to frequent Y Crew Gym and was known to be close with Tamerlan. Ibrahim was known as a hothead and a guy with a short temper. The owner of the gym described him as a, quote, lunatic. Upon hearing this, the FBI flew to Orlando, where Ibrahim was living with his girlfriend, and after questioning him for multiple hours, he allegedly confessed that he and Tamerlan had killed Rafi, Eric, and Brendan after they gained entry into the apartment at gunpoint. Only the people in the room know what happened during the interrogation, but the official FBI report states that after conducting the massacre, Tamerlan and Ibrahim allegedly spent hours cleaning up forensic evidence and stealing thousands of dollars, which they later split between themselves. However, just before Ibrahim was about to put his confession into writing, law enforcement shot him as they alleged he had lunged at them.
And Tom, this is a bizarre turn of events. Sources tell ABC News that Ibrahim Todashev admitted to a role in a 2011 murder in Waltham, Massachusetts, a murder the FBI believes the older Tsarnaev brother was also involved in. A short time later, Todashev was shot and killed.
This sequence of events has been heavily disputed by many people due to the conflicting stories of law enforcement. In one report, he is said to have lunged with a knife, while in another, he is described as using a pole or a broomstick. Additionally, White spent hours confessing to murders, only to attack after the confession. Several parts of his confession also don't match up with the crime scene. For instance, Todashev allegedly said they had bound their hands with tape. However, no tape or residue was ever found on the victims. He also wasn't able to name a murder weapon. The FBI also blocked the autopsy report for 9 months and released inconsistent information on his death. In 2014, the autopsy report was finally released and it concluded that, quote, the agent fired in self-defense and that no close-range shots were observable. This statement will clash with what Ibrahim's father said, that there was evidence that his son was shot in the head at point-blank range. Eventually, 9 years later, they ended up releasing Todashev's clothing and some other evidence, but the mystery of what happened that day still persists. Even though police consider Tamerlan and Ibrahim as being the ones behind the Waltham triple murder on 12 Harding Avenue, the case is officially still open to this day.